tonight. The title of the talk is The Alchemical Path. So as part of the talk, I'm going to talk about alchemy. The Alchemical Path, Demons and Daimons, in William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. So William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell is actually it's an 18th century poem written by William Blake, who's a kind of visionary religious poet, really, Englishman. And I'll say more about him as we go through the talk. So really it's just going to be like exploring some of those themes, really. But I'll just say a little bit more about just the idea of the imagination. So I said the arts and the imagination. So the imagination is quite a big part of Triratna and Sangharakshita's teaching, really. In some ways it can be the kind of missing ingredient. So one of the things about Buddhism is that, in Buddhism's sort of transmission to the West, is that it's fitted our Western rational models of life very, very well. Yeah. So one of the reasons that it's quite popular in a lot of ways is that in some ways it's quite simple to make sense of. It makes sense in ways that other religions perhaps don't. It doesn't have the same kind of requirements in terms of belief and that kind of stuff. So it could be quite attractive to materialist, rational, modern, or whatever we are, postmodern, whatever we are now, Westerners, basically. So I think in a lot of the transmission of the Dharma to the West, that's been the emphasis, because it's been the bit that we've been able to get hold of. Yeah, that's the bit that we've been able to relate to most easily, because we've been to some extent, we've rejected the more, what you might call religious aspects of traditions. But I think Sangharakshita's emphasised imagination because he sees it could be that in a way without it in some sort of form, the Dharma, our experience of the Dharma and our transmission of the Dharma is going to be quite limited, or to some extent limited. The imagination is the kind of juice, in a way, you could say. Yeah, so you could practice the Dharma in a kind of very rational sort of way, but it might mean that it only really affects the rational part of your being, the rational part of us. And that if we want deeper and more sustained change, it's like we have to kind of speak to our depths as well. We have to speak to the sort of in a way that we have to speak to our dreams as well as to our kind of head knowledge, our kind of to our dreams as well as our understanding, you could say. Yeah. So and the imagination, I think, is Sangharakshita's way of talking about that. It's his way of talking about that part of the path. Yeah. So what I'm going to try and talk about tonight is a different way of looking at the Dharma life than probably most of the time that we talk about here. This is a different way of approaching our path, you could say. And it could be a more alchemical way. We could look at it more as a kind of creative way. One of the things about our kind of intake of the Dharma is that it quite often has a particular kind of flavour. So part of that for me is that I feel that if I'm a good Buddhist, I should have a tidy bedroom, basically, yeah? So I feel like, if I was a kind of monk with a kind of, shaved head and a robe and a bowl, living in simplicity in a hut, I would have a kind of meticulously swept hut, yeah? Being very careful not to hurt any of the insects, with just one or two Dharma books, and there would be this kind of pure, organised, rational, reasonable, clear kind of space or world that I might inhabit. Yeah, and in some ways that's something of the idealised version of the monk. Yeah, but my bedroom isn't really like that, and most people's bedrooms are probably not like that. I've seen Tom's; it certainly isn't. Well, in a way, I think we could use Tom's bedroom as a metaphor for the whole of what we're talking about, but we won't get into that. So, my bedroom is a bit of a mess, right? And I was thinking about, but I still feel like I make spiritual progress, basically. I feel like, and most of the time I feel quite spiritually inspired and quite happy and quite motivated to practice the Dharma. And I don't see my bedroom as being a kind of horrible, because it sometimes looks a bit of a bomb site. So I don't see that connection always, do you know what I mean? So there must be something else going on. So is there another metaphor for the way that I'm living my spiritual life? I've wondered, in the chaos.
After one lived in.
Lived in, yeah.
You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I don't do clinical.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, so it is this. I've got this lived-in bedroom, you could say. Yeah. So I thought, well, maybe what I feel like when I'm in my bedroom is I feel like I'm an artist, perhaps. Yeah. Or a creative person rather than just a slob. Yeah. So it's like. So perhaps I'm wondering if there's another type of a more mercurial kind of creativity that is available to us that's part of the Dharma life as well. Yeah. And it's another way of looking at it. So that's basically what I'm going to explore tonight through talking about a couple of things. I'm going to talk about demons. I'm going to talk about alchemy a little bit, and I'm going to talk about read particularly some parts of William Blake's poems and talk about that. Because what it is in a way is that perhaps like a sort of the rational, straightforward textbook version of the Dharma is quite like, it's particularly when it's involved, isn't it, in these ideas of skillful and unskillful, or say the ethics, yeah? So we get, skillful action, unskillful action, yeah? You get nirvana, you get samsara. You get these divisions. And so it's without, almost unconsciously, we start to kind of interpret the Dharma in terms of divisions, in terms of what you might call dualities, yeah? So, but what we get with the imagination is a criticism of duality, yeah? It sees duality to some extent as a problem, yeah? What duality does is that it actually locks us, yeah? So when I say duality, what I'm talking about is this situation of choosing, yeah? So we are always choosing. There's a version of the Dharma which is always choosing us or encouraging us to choose one aspect of experience over another, yeah? So it's like, okay, I'm going to say the kind word, not the nasty word. I'm going to not do that, I'm going to do that, yeah? And we're caught in this world of choice, of making choices. And at one level, then that's functional, and it's very, very helpful, and it's very skillful, as we say, yeah? But that's one particular metaphor. And the idea behind that metaphor is that we just more and more and more keep choosing the good over the bad, yeah? You could say, yeah? Or the kusala over the akusala, the skillful over the unskillful. But there are limits and limitations in that way of practicing, potentially for us. Because I think there are problems with dualism. Yeah, there are problems with this duality of two, of there always being two things that we're trying to choose between. Yeah. There can be a sense of confinement in that, I think. We can feel confined in some ways. That it's almost like our kind of experience is being divided up and categorised and conceptualised and parcelled up and it's someone else's version of it, and it's not our actual experience. Yeah. We've got an idealised version of the Dharma, but how does that actually relate to our bedroom? Yeah, how does that relate to our lived-in life? Yeah, how does that relate to our kind of mess, you could say? Yeah, and this constant choosing has a shadow side. The shadow side of constantly choosing is that we end up reaffirming our sense of separation. Because we're constantly separating ourselves from our experience so that we can choose between the good and the negative, yeah, the positive and the negative. So actually what the Dharma can do is it can turn you into a control freak, basically, yeah. And if you're a bit of a control freak to start with, and we are, one of the ways that you can talk about samsara is that it's a world that's full of control freaks, yeah, trying to control each other and trying to control themselves. And this way of looking, if we're not careful, can reinforce that. In the West, we've got problems with dualism or duality. Our worldview in the West tends to come from René Descartes. I think he's 18th century, isn't he, René Descartes? And he's got this idea of there being a duality, particularly between the mind and the body. Yeah, so what Descartes said, he did a sort of philosophical inquiry and he came to the conclusion that what we are is a kind of spirit, or a body or a soul that lives inside a body. A spirit which is a spirit or a soul which lives inside a body. Yeah, and that actually is kind of how we take ourselves to be. So sometimes it's described as the ghost in the machine. Yeah, and the ghost is the spirit or the soul, and the body is the machine that kind of carries it around. And that, if you ask most people in the West what they take themselves to be, that's probably what they would say. Yeah, they would say, inside me, where are you? I'm inside. I am something separate within the body that is inside the body. Yeah, it's quite an alienated way of approaching your life. It's a particularly an alienated way of approaching your physical experience in your body and your imagination. Yeah. So what you get with duality also is there tends to be a kind of downgrading of the body and its energies, and an upgrading of the spirit and the soul. The spirit and the soul. But there's also a downgrading of the imagination. So one of the central issues, I'm going to say, around, and this is very much what Blake talks about, one of the central issues around duality is what it does to energy. Because if we're categorising and we're splitting up all the time between two things, then actually what we do is we're chaining ourselves, we're locking up our energy isn't free. One of the ways that you can talk about a Buddha or an enlightened consciousness is that it is unconfined and unconstrained. It's free. The energy has got complete liberty to go anywhere. The energy of the enlightened mind has complete liberty to go anywhere. Yeah. It's not worrying about good and bad, actually. Ultimate reality, you could say, is pure energy. Ultimate reality is pure energy. And the Buddhist tradition does approach that in certain areas of the tradition, particularly in what you could call what's called the Tantra, which is a much more kind of symbolic. It's a path of Buddhism which is to do much more to do with symbols and symbolism and energy. That's what it's interested in. Yeah, and it's saying that the path is a path of transformation and creativity that's quite similar to an artistic path. It's a tantric path, you could say. Yeah, where in a sense we are being, rather than denying some of the energies of the world, we are actually taking them and using them as the path, you could say. Yeah, it's a world of magic and symbolism. Yeah, one of the ways that you could talk about tantric practitioners is they're like loads of Buddhist magicians, basically, yeah? Or Buddhist artists, you could say. So one of the ways that you can look at that is that it's kind of an artistic path, or you can look at it as a kind of visionary way of being. Yeah. So what also the Tantra is also interested in, and what this kind of more imaginative, symbolic approach to the Dharma is interested in, the quality of vision or being a visionary. Yeah. The Buddha was actually a visionary as well as being a kind of monk. He had visions. He saw depths. He saw things in very poetic ways. He saw things in very symbolic ways. He visited gods. His experience of the universe and the world was very multidimensional. And in the West, we get that, particularly in Western Romanticism, yeah, in Romantic poetry particularly, yeah. So you get it in the Romantic poets, and you also get it in poets like Walt Whitman later. Yeah, this kind of, it's like this vision, and you get it in Wordsworth. The vision is like vision. So vision is when this kind of pure energy, the pure energy of the enlightened consciousness, is pushing into expression. Yeah. It's when it wants to begin to express itself. Yeah. If I asked you what the enlightened mind was, you might say, okay, it's the end of suffering. Yeah, it's pure compassion. It's pure wisdom. So your answer, you might answer with concepts. Yeah. If I was to ask a tantric teacher what enlightenment was, he might hold up a vajra, which is the equivalent of a thunderbolt, a symbol of a thunderbolt. Yeah. Or he might just point at something. Yeah, but he would be trying to communicate things in a more non-conceptual way that was closer to the raw energy, the raw unconstrained energy of enlightenment. Yeah, it's a bit like there's a journey, you could say. There's a journey from the pure energy of the enlightened consciousness that it can enter the world of symbols, and then beyond that, by the time it gets to the world of concepts, it's getting further and further away from that raw, pure, unconstrained energy at the beginning, you could say. Yeah. The original energy of enlightenment. So when a Zen practitioner might ask, what is my original face, or what is my origin, that is the original energy of enlightenment. Yeah. Good. Right with that so far? Does that make sense? Yeah?
Beautiful. I like that.
Good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Milarepa. So Milarepa is a Tibetan yogi, and a Tibetan Buddha. He's an enlightened being. I think he's about 11th century Tibetan teacher. Interesting character, if you know anything about Milarepa. He is noted as an extreme ascetic. Yeah, so he lived high in the snows of in Tibet. He didn't eat much, so what he did was he lived off nettles. Apparently, quite a lot of the time. If there were enough nettles to grow, he had some nettles. So quite often, when you see pictures or images of him, he's green, just because they say that like the nettles turned him green. And he's seen, when you see him, he's either just dressed in a loincloth, he's semi-naked, quite a raw figure, or he's seated on, because the tantric practitioners of North India and Tibet would often sit on a tiger skin. Yeah, it was a symbol of that kind of primal energy of the tiger that they would be sitting on. So he was interested in transforming those energies. He was interested in the rawness and the closeness of those energies, you could say. But before that, what Milarepa was a black magician, basically, yeah. Milarepa had got involved in a family feud as a young man, and he had basically killed a load of people through black magic. And he's suddenly like, oh dear, that's not very good karma, is it, really? We probably couldn't get much worse karma than killing people in a family feud through black magic. So he's very, very motivated, which is why you get this quite extreme asceticism, We don't try as hard because we're probably not as bad. We're probably not as bad as Milarepa, but we're probably not going to be as good as him either, really, are we? But, so there's a story about Milarepa. Milarepa is living in his cave, yeah, and he's gone deep, deep, deep into meditation. He's been meditating for like days and days and days, maybe more and more. And he opens his eyes and he looks around his cave and he's like, oh dear, I've run out of food. Yeah. So he's thinking, I've got to go out. And he's not eaten for days. He's probably been fasting as well. So he goes outside the cave. He leaves the entrance of the cave and he wanders out onto the mountainside. And he thinks, I've got to go down to the village to get some supplies. But he doesn't realise how weak he is, and it's windy. Yeah, you can imagine how windy it is on a Tibetan mountain. It's like the intensity of wind. I did a solitary retreat in Wales. The wind can get pretty bad in Wales. I was in this like cottage type place for like a couple of weeks, just meditating. Graham's been there as well. The wind can really get on your head, can't it? It whistles and it vibrates, and the cottage is shaking all the time. It kind of gets inside your mind. At one point, it got so intense on the retreat, I felt like I was kind of getting, like I was starting to go mad because of this wind. I actually had to go down and walk down off the top of the hill down into the valley to get into some shelter for a bit because I needed peace from I felt like I was being assaulted by the wind. So I kind of quite relate to this. So Milarepa goes out into the wind and he's weak because he's been fasting. First thing that happens is the big gust of wind and he gets blown over and falls on the floor and faints because he's so weak. And he's lying there, and then he opens his eyes at some point, and then as he opens his eyes he starts to have a vision, and he has a vision of Marpa, who is his guru. He has this very positive vision of Marpa, his guru, and he sings a song of devotion to Marpa, his guru. And then he goes back to into his cave, and this is what happens when he goes back to his cave. Where is it? Oh, yeah. I'll just read you a little bit of his love song to his guru. Abiding in this cave alone is the noblest service to the Darkinis, who are like the enlightened female principle. To devote myself to the holy Dharma is the best service to Buddhism. To devote my life to meditation, thus to aid my helpless sentient fellow beings. To love death and sickness is a blessing. I'll come back to that at some point later. Through which to cleanse one's sins. To refuse forbidden food helps one to attain realization and enlightenment. To repay my Father Guru's bounties, I meditate and meditate again. Guru mine, pray, grant me your protection. Help this mendicant to stay ever in his hermitage. And it changes into prose. Exalted, so he's kind of had contact with the guru, so he's in a kind of very exalted state of consciousness now. Milarepa adjusted his robe and carried a handful of wood back to the cave. Inside, he was startled to find 5 Indian demons with eyes as large as saucers. One was sitting on his bed and preaching. 2 were listening to the sermon. Another was preparing and offering food. And the last was studying Milarepa's books. Following his initial shock, Milarepa thought, these must be magical apparitions of the local deities who dislike me. Though I have been living here a long time, I have never given them any offering to compliment. So he's come back and basically there's been a home invasion, yeah, you could say, by these demons. And they're Indian demons, which is interesting because he's in Tibet. So I don't know why they're Indian demons, probably maybe sent from Indian sorcerers. One of them is preparing offerings, so presumably he's making an offering to a dark force of some kind. Yeah. So Milarepa, they've got eyes as large as saucers, is the only clue it gives, which is slightly comical, isn't it? But I'm just wondering about the reality of that, you know, what that would be like. If we had suddenly, you know, we start chanting a mantra later here and we get a demon suddenly sitting next to us, yeah, that's going to actually lead to quite a feeling of uneasiness, probably particularly if you've been meditating in your cave for like a year without seeing anybody or something like that. Yeah. So I'm just trying to kind of capture some of the intensity of how that might have been for Milarepa. And then I just want to talk a little bit about what a demon is. So a demon is a force of, first of all you could say externally a demon is a force of darkness, yeah? The part of the forces of darkness, you could say, yeah. And there's a strong tradition in asceticism, particularly, you get it in Christian asceticism as well, of ascetics in the hills and in the mountains, in deep solitude, being assaulted by demons. The Christian monastics are obsessed by it. They're like all of like St. Anthony and that. All they did, they're all just like get up and fight a demon, get up and fight another demon, get up. They just get like one demon after another. But I'm just wondering what a demon is and what they are. And I think they've got, what it is demons have a particular kind of quality. And I think what you get in this story of Milarepa, particularly as part of one of that quality, is that they invade. Yeah. So I think one of the ways that can help us, what this is pointing at for people like us in our situation, is it's some aspect of our experience which seems to invade our situation, yeah, or it's invading our status quo, yeah. So we might be going along quite okay, yeah, quite easily, and then suddenly there's this big. There might be like, it feels like something's come in from nowhere. We don't know where it's come from. And it's disrupting everything, yeah? And it's changing everything. It's like having a poltergeist. It's like having a psychic poltergeist loose in your kind of, but not loose, just loose in your house, but loose in you, yeah? Loose in your being. So they're disturbing and invasive. And they can also, and they're very intense. They trigger, or they are, very intense emotions. Yeah, so there's a quality of incredible emotional intensity that goes with this sort of demonic invasion in our psyche, you could say, yeah. So an example for me is I've felt that I've been going pretty smoothly on the spiritual life for about a good 6-7 years, you know. It's had a few ups and downs, but I've been like this. But recently I had an incredible emotional reaction to somebody, what somebody was doing. And it completely disturbed me. It completely threw me off. I couldn't think of anything else, yeah. I was pushed to my right, to my edge, by this emotional reaction that I was having to somebody else, you know. Fortunately, I could get away from them because I don't know what I'd have done if I'd have been with them. But it was my reaction, you know. Objectively, there were some circumstances, but it was my demon, and it invaded, and it came upon me, you could say.
I can
Yeah,
relate to that.
yeah,
That's exactly what you're talking
yeah,
about.
yeah,
We don't need demons, we need them through people sometimes,
yeah.
and circumstances.
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Carl Jung talks about them as being like a possession. So sometimes we can feel that we get possessed. If we get possessed by a particular pattern or habit or emotional quality. It can feel like we're being possessed by something which is outside us but might actually be within us. Yeah, I like that. And the other thing about them is demons, and the thing that really, as well as being invasive and disturbing, they are also really stubborn. They don't want to go away. Yeah. So when I was having this emotional reaction to this person, it was just like, it was sitting on me like something sitting on my back or on my shoulders. Yeah. It didn't want to go away. And I've written on the bottom there, a demon is what won't go away. It's what we don't want there. We don't want it to be there, but it won't go away. Yeah. So does that make sense? Just one of the ways that we could look at demons. I don't want to diminish the possibility of them existing in reality either, actually. You know, I think, you know, I'm not going to say that there aren't any demons, but I think for us they might be, you know, it's a helpful way of looking at it is more psychological. I don't feel very equipped as an exorcist, so I can't say very much more about that, but I'm just open to the possibility that they exist. Why not be? I think there's quite a lot of stories from people saying that they do. So Milarepa has got his demons, his sorcerer-eyed Indian demons, in his house, and he's had his home invasion, and he's got to do something about it. So he tries a few different things. So he says, although I have been living here a long time, I have never given them any offering or compliment. So the first thing he does is he just sort of tries to placate them by making them an offering. He thinks they're just a local god that might be just sort of wanting a bit of attention. Yeah. I actually did have an experience of a local god wanting attention. I used to live in Africa at one point, and once I was meditating and doing a load of pujas, and I was lying in my bed, and I had this sense that the local spirits all came, and they came around my bed, and they were demanding attention. They were kind of like, why? And my feeling was they were like saying, it was a bit like a load of kind of the big local lads kind of leaning in and going, you know, what are you up to? You know, you need to know that we're the boss round here. You know, what are you? They weren't really, really malevolent, but they was a bit like they were just sort of staking their territory a bit, you could say, yeah. And it scared the shit out of me, basically. I was like, rid of Africa. And I just felt they kind of leaned in on me. It was very interesting at the time. So, and it's interesting in somewhere like Africa, there's, you know, the difference between the worlds is much thinner. Yeah, between the supernatural worlds and the worlds that we live in are much thinner. Anyway, so he says, so he sings them a song as an offering. He likes his songs, Milarepa, he sings them a song. Telling them how beautiful the local area is. This lonely spot where stands my hut is a place pleasing to the Buddhas, and then he goes on and on and on. And then he says, ye local demons, ghosts and gods, all friends of Milarepa, drink the nectar of kindness and compassion, then return to your abodes. So he offers them kindness and compassion. But the Indian demons did not vanish and stared balefully at Milarepa. Two of them advanced, one grimacing and biting his lower lip, and the other grinding his teeth horribly. A third, coming up behind, gave a violent, malicious laugh and shouted loudly as they all tried to frighten Milarepa with fearful grimaces and gestures. Milarepa, knowing their evil motives, began the wrathful Buddha meditation and recited forcefully a powerful incantation. So he's offered them love and it's not worked, so now he's going through power. Yeah? He's summoning a wrathful, enlightened form to help, and he's chanting a powerful magical mantra to try and drive them away through strength. Still the demons would not leave. Then with great compassion he preached the Dharma to them. So he starts, so maybe what they need is they need to hear the Dharma. He starts to teach the Dharma to the demons. And this one I relate to. It's just about stopping, but I had this recurring dream of I'm teaching a class, not unlike this. Actually, normally it's got loads of school kids in it because I teach school kids, and they're not listening. And I'm trying to teach them the Dharma, but they're just not listening. They're really distracted. And I can see that I think what that is, it's me That's the symbol of me. I'm trying to teach all the different bits of myself the Dharma, but quite a bits of myself are just not that interesting, basically, and are not listening. So he tries teaching them the Dharma, yet they still remained. So they're still there. Then Milarepa, in a dauntless mood, sang the song of realization. This is his final one. The eagle never falls down from the sky. If so, would that not be absurd? An iron block cannot be cracked by a stone. If so, why refine the iron ore? I, Milarepa, fear neither demons nor evils. If they frightens Milarepa, to what avail would be his realization and enlightenment? Ye ghosts and demons, enemies of the Dharma, I welcome you today. It is my pleasure to receive you. I pray you stay, do not hasten to leave. We will discourse and play together. Although you would be gone, stay the night. We will pit the black against the white Dharma and see who plays the best. Before you came, you vowed to afflict me. Shame and disgrace would follow if you returned with this vow unfulfilled. Milarepa arose with confidence and rushed straight at the demons in his cave. Frightened, they shrank back, rolling their eyes in despair and trembling violently. Then, swirling together like a whirlpool, they all merged into one and vanished. This was the demon king Vinayaka, the obstacle maker, who came searching for evil opportunities, thought Milarepa. The storm too was undoubtedly his creation. By the mercy of my guru, he had no chance to harm me. So he actually defeats the demons through fearlessness in the end, yeah? By abandoning fear of that disturbance, by abandoning fear of the thing that won't go away. And then he invites them to stay and play. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who had suffered sort of low-level depression for many years. And she was saying that, I was talking to her about this, and she was saying she can remember lying down on a bed, feeling depressed, lying down on a bed and welcoming it. She'd spent years and years and years fearing the mental states that came with depression. Yeah, we might fear the mental states which come with anger or which come with anxiety. Yeah, but she turned down and she turned to it and she became fearless about it and she fully accepted it and she welcomed it into play. And she said she felt it disappear then, and in a way it never really came back in the way it had done. Just through that, because she turned and ran towards it rather than running away from it. It's very easy to fear what disturbs us the most, isn't it? Yeah, this is really talking about the enlightened quality of fearlessness. I work sometimes with people with mental health issues, teaching mindfulness, and sometimes there's people there that have had a panic attack. And I've never had a panic attack, but from what they say to me, it's an absolutely horrendous experience. It's a really, 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 really frightening experience. You think you're going to die, I think, if you have a panic attack. And but then what happens is subsequently they develop a fear of having a panic attack, which then controls their life and really has a worse effect than the panic attack itself. And they live in a state of, sometimes they're living in a state of fear, and they're saying to themselves, you know, I've got to keep myself together, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, because they're fearing. There's another person that I met who had a very serious illness. She had a stroke and nearly died, and then she was absolutely terrified afterwards that it was going to happen again. And then as soon as she would think about it, she would just start to dissolve into this sort of state of anguish and fear as a result of it. Whilst I feel like intuitively for these people, you know, it's like that if they do what Milarepa did, which is to turn and face it, yeah? And we all have that sort of stuff going on. Those are just examples of it. I'm not saying that we're better than people like that. Those are just the examples that I'm using, really. Yeah. So this is a slightly different model, isn't it? It's a slightly different way of looking at things compared to the way of looking at things, which is the kind of, I will do my mindfulness and I will drop that thought and I will do this and I will do that, yeah. In a way, we're abandoning control rather than taking it, yeah, and we're opening up to that raw energy. We're moving towards we're seeing that the demon can be a gateway to the unconstrained energy, you could say. That's what Tantra is, basically. Yeah, it's using the afflictions, it's using the moments that we're most disturbed as the path, as the gateway into the unconditioned, as the gateway into the unconstrained energy, the pure energy. So another way of looking at this stuff is, and I'm going to just talk about, not in Buddhist terms now a little bit, but a little bit more in Western terms, which is I'm just going to talk about alchemy a little bit, because alchemy touches in similar areas really. And then I'm going to talk about William Blake's poem and talk a bit about the alchemical parts in that. So alchemy is like the Western esoteric tradition, the West part of the Western spiritual tradition, you could say, yeah. And what it's called sometimes is the magnum opus, or the great work, yeah. So, and it's the great work of transformation. It's the great work. So what the alchemists were up to really is that on the outside, what they were trying to do was they were trying to turn what they call base metals into gold, yeah. So I think it was like lead. They were trying to transform. They were trying to find the chemical ways of transforming lead into gold. But there's another way of looking at alchemy, particularly developed by Carl Jung, as one of the main people that's written about it, is that they're actually describing a spiritual process of transformation. So you're trying to turn the lead of our mess into the gold, to something higher. And the goal of alchemy is sometimes called the philosopher's stone, yeah, or the stone of the wise. So that's the kind of symbol. It's a little bit like the Vajra, actually, or a little bit like the jewel of the Buddha. It's like this kind of perfect jewel with this quality. Sometimes it's also equated with the Grail, with the Holy Grail as well in the Western esoteric tradition. And alchemy speaks the similar language to Tantra in some ways. It speaks it doesn't speak a rational language. It speaks a symbolic and an elusive and a suggestive language. It's not rational, and it works through symbols. It's quite obscure and it's quite difficult. What we're going to look at from now on, we're going to look at Blake. Blake's a very obscure writer, and these alchemical writers, and Tantra is really obscure in a particular way. What we were talking about was incredibly simple. It almost thrives on obscurity, because what Tantra is trying to, and alchemy and Blake are trying to do, and visionary writing is trying to do, is it's trying to kind of break our habitual consciousness. It's trying to kind of break it open into a new space, into a new way, so something new, so the new life can come in, yeah? But it's trying to do that through symbolic means. It's trying to do that through speaking the language which is much closer, rather than speaking the language of concepts, speaking the language of poetry and symbol in the imagination, which is closer to the pure, unconstrained energy of enlightenment. So what you get in alchemy is that there's a kind of journey, and you end up with the philosopher's stone at the end. I'm going to concentrate more at the beginning. You get what's called the rubido, which I'm not sure if that's a Latin or Italian word, which is redness, which is the philosopher's stone itself. So that's where it's all going. Red sulfur, or the red elixir, it's sometimes called, yeah. And in Buddhism, sometimes you get the word elixir as well. In the Bodhicattva, the bodhicitta, or compassion, is sometimes, of the enlightened, awakened mind, is sometimes called an elixir. It's a medicine, isn't it? An elixir. It's an all-healing medicine, isn't it? So that's the end point. Before that, you have what's called the albedo, he said, Latin and Italian, which is white, which is illumination and fixedness and stability. And then the third one, which is the one that which is more interesting in the light of what I've been talking about, is what's called the nigredo, which is blackness. So what the alchemist says, that the first stage is the nigredo, it's blackness, it's darkness. I think this is really interesting. So the nigredo is to do with Saturn. So he's this very dry, old, The Negredo is to do with death. The alchemical path actually begins with death. It's to do with corrosion and putrefaction. Excuse me. And putrefaction?
Yeah.
Rotting. It's to do with...
Like putrefaction.
Yeah, it's to do with rotting. And cooking and corrosion. So what it's actually talking about at this stage is very much, it's like when the demon comes. Because this stage it's when what is fixed is dissolved. So the first stage of the alchemical process is that you've got to break up the solidity of what's called the prima materia, the original material that you're working with. Yeah. So, and actually a demon can really help us do that. When we get that reaction, that's the opportunity. We're at the edge of the Negredo. We're at the edge of the first stage of the process, and it's a very kind of auspicious moment because we're being shaken. Yeah, we're being cooked, as the alchemists might say. Yeah, it's a bit like we're being put on a little burner and we're going. Rumi talks about it as well, doesn't he? In one of his poems, he talks about boiling chickpeas, and the chickpeas are trying to get out of the pot. They're being cooked and boiled, and they're like, They're trying to get out of the pot, and then the cook goes, no, you're not cooked enough yet, and he puts them back in. And then in the end, the chickpeas, I think, probably end up saying, please put me back in the pot, I need more cooking. So that's the kind of metaphor. So it's good to feel cooked. Sometimes people use that in Buddhist terms as well, don't they? I'm feeling a bit cooked. And the Negredo also is blackness, it's darkness. And it's saying that the light is in the dark. It's really interesting. It's saying that the light is in the dark. One of the central images of the Negredo in the alchemical tradition is the idea of the black sun, which I think is just a really, really interesting image. I don't know what it means, but I don't think it matters. It's just like, imagine a black sun. The sun is black. All of our metaphors and our mythologies are normally to do with like, the sun is light. The Buddha is light. The Buddha is the sun. I want to go towards the light. This is saying the sun is black. The sun is black.
Tens of thousands of years it will actually stop burning. That point will be.
Will it? Okay. Yeah. So this blackness, the other word, and this is what's really good about the way it ties into Blake, is hell. The Negredo and the demon is hell. How are we doing for time? You're right, we've got about another sort of 20 minutes. Can we handle another 20 minutes? I do go on, I'm sorry, I'll try to get them shorter.
Very interesting.
Is it?
Very
Good. William Blake. Two stories. I've got two stories, but it might take more than 20 minutes. Two stories about William Blake. I was into literature at school. It was the part. I didn't have any religion. I didn't have any spiritual contact with anything when I was a teenager. But I did have contact with William Blake. And because I remember there used to be a book cupboard at school, and I was really into poetry and I was really into literature. It was the closest that I could find to the path in those days. And I remember going to this book cupboard and I found a book of poems by William Blake, which I only recently lost or got rid of because I nicked it basically out of the book cupboard. I thought my spiritual need is greater. And I read it. And I read part of this poem by William Blake, and it's two of the lines in it stayed with me. And they, in a way, the first line really opened up my spiritual life for me. I'll say what it is. I haven't got time to go into it now, but it's another talk really. There's a line in the poem which says, eternity is in love with the productions of time. Yeah. Eternity is in love with the productions of time. But anyway, that just had a big effect on me. Years later, I'm 29 or 30, and I'm living in a sort of semi-derelict house in Sheffield. But I've been involved with Buddhism for about 18 months, and I'm meditating. A time of real transition in my life. I'm returning from living in Africa. I'm quite ill. That's the end of a long-term relationship that I've been in. I'm meditating quite a lot. I'm spending a lot of time in graveyards, and I'm reading William Blake's prophetic books out loud, yeah, as part of my life. And I'm reading them in the bath out loud in this derelict house. And I'm also at the same time reading a biography. It's a really good biography of William Blake by Peter Ackroyd. So if you're interested in Blake, it really makes Blake much, much more accessible and much easier to get. It's a really good book. And I'm reading that, and there's a point where Blake gets falsely accused. There's someone who doesn't like him. He lived in the 18th century in London, and there's someone that doesn't like him. And in those days, if you don't like someone, it's a bit like Russia is now, basically. You just have to accuse them of something, and the police will arrest you, basically. Yeah. So someone accused him of treason, even though he hadn't done it, and he gets thrown in jail, and he thought he was going to get hanged. Anyway, I read that in the morning. In the afternoon, I get a bus into town. I'm sitting on the bus on the way back, and then two policemen, the bus stops, and it stops and it won't go. And everyone's wondering what's where. Two police get on, put me in handcuffs, drag me off the bus, and throw me in the police cells. And someone had pointed out and said to me that I'd committed a robbery. It was like a mistaken identity, I'll have you know. But I was thrown in the jails. And it was just the same time that I read this, and it was like this incredible synchronicity. So it really strange. And I actually had quite a spiritual shift the next morning. They did let me out. But I actually had cuts on my hands where those vicious kind of handcuffs, solid handcuffs that they used. Because they were nasty to me because they thought I was a thief. I'm like, I'm just a middle-class person. What are you doing? Yeah. Well, maybe it was my karma. Maybe it was the karma, yeah, from that. I hadn't thought of it like that. Maybe I deserved it. Anyway, it turned out all right. But I remember being in the police cells anyway. But it was a very interesting experience. But I just felt this incredible kind of synchronicity with Blake. Anyway, I just thought I'd put that in there. Not because it says about me, but because I think it's suggestive of that world of magic and imagination, really. So one of Blake's poems, this is Blake's writing. Lots of it. And it's obscure. He's not an easy read, Blake, yeah? He's quite hard to get into, I think. He was also an engraver. So in the Tate, there's a Blake, in the Tate gallery in London, there's the Blake room where his engravings, he would make these engravings, print them and then watercolour them in. They're amazing. There's loads of them. You can see pictures of them online, actually. They are really tiny. If you go into the Blake room, the pictures, these amazingly famous pictures, and they're about this big. If you see, they're much better blown up on the internet. You can really see them in the detail. And they're just really like kind of cosmic, basically. Yeah, that's the only way that I can describe it. And I really recommend you have a look at them. Are there? Yeah. And so quite often his poetry was a combination of art, engraving. So I think engraving is important with Blake, because I think engraving tuned him into this alchemical quality, yeah? Because he was using chemistry, he was using heat, he was using different kinds of mixtures of inks and stuff like that. And he was using what they call corrosives, yeah? And corrosives are very important. Corrosives on a nigredo. The corrosive is the chemical which breaks up the solidity of the fixity, yeah? Which allows the surface of things to change and deepen and become art, you could say, yeah? And in Blake, he's not easy, it's obscure, but what I think he's trying to do is he's trying to break us into a new state of consciousness. He was basically quite an enlightened being, Blake. I'm absolutely convinced of it. He may not have been a full Buddha, but the way that he talks, the insights that he had are just like nothing else in the West that was before, basically. It's just another level. And he's trying to break down dualism through symbolism. You know, he's quite close to that raw energy, Blake. And it's his main theme as well, this raw energy, the open energy. So one of the things about Blake is that in some ways he's better to recite rather than read. Yeah, there's an incantatory quality to it. Yeah, they're religious books, they're holy books. That serve being read out loud rather than just in the sort of quiet privacy. So if you read Blake, it's really good to read him out loud. And they're invoking this kind of energetic, visionary consciousness, you could say. And what Blake's really interested in is opposites in this poem. So it's the marriage of heaven and hell. So it's a little bit like what I've been talking about, yeah? He's exploring this idea of what's good and what's really good and what's really bad, yeah? And he turns it on its head in this poem. So basically the devils are the heroes, you could say, yeah? And the angels are not the heroes. The devils contain the energy and the truth in this poem, yeah. So, I'll just read a bit and just let it affect you. You don't have to understand it. You're not going to understand Blake. I don't understand him. I don't think he's very understandable, but he can have an effect, yeah? The opening, the argument. Rintrah roars and shakes his fires in the burdened air. Hungry clouds swag on the deep. Once meek and in a perilous path, the just man kept his course along the vale of death. Roses are planted where thorns grow, and on the barren heath sing the honeybees. Then the perilous path was planted, and a river and a spring on every cliff and tomb, and on the bleached bones red clay brought forth, till the villain left the paths of ease to walk in perilous paths, and drive the just man into barren climes. Now the sneaking serpent walks in mild humility, and the just man rages in the wilds where the lions roam. Rintrah roars and shakes his fires in the burdened air. Hungry clouds swag on the deep. All Bibles or sacred codes have been the causes of the following errors. That man has two real existing principles, a body and a soul. The energy called evil is alone from the body, and that reason called good is alone from the soul. That God will torment man in eternity for following his energies. But the following contraries to this are true. Energy is the only life, and is from the body, and reason is the bound or outward circumference of energy. Energy is eternal delight. Energy is eternal delight. That's one of the main communications of Blake, yeah? Energy, he's talking about energy, he's talking about that pure, unconstrained quality. Those who restrain desire do so because theirs is weak enough to be restrained. And the restrainer or reason usurps its place and governs the unwilling. And being restrained is by degrees become passive till it is only the shadow of desire. So he's really talking there about how society and religious laws and spiritual laws, and even the law of the Dharma, you could say, if taken wrongly, imprison, weaken us. Yeah, they weaken that energy. Energy is eternal delight. Energy is eternal delight. He talks a little bit later about Milton. So John Milton is a famous English poet who wrote Paradise Lost. It's an amazing poem. It's really worth reading. It really is. It's about Satan falling from heaven to hell, and a lot of it is about Satan. But it's a really good poem because it's basically what they say. And this is a very famous bit of Blake, and he's always quoted whenever you read about Milton. This is always quoted whenever you read about Milton. It says, the reason Milton wrote in fetters when he wrote of angels and God, and at liberty when of devils and hell, is because he was a true poet, and of the devil's party without knowing it. So what he's saying is that Milton set out to write this poem, which was to explain the Christian version of events, yeah, with the devils being bad and the angels being good. But because Milton's primary, deeper instinct was as a poet, he couldn't help but give all the best lines to the devil. Because that's where the energy is, yeah? So the real hero of Paradise Lost, the critics nearly all say the real hero of Paradise Lost is Satan. He's the devil. He's like a Nietzschean hero. He's like a kind of overcoming hero. He's the attractive figure. And if you read the poem, Milton is always struggling to kind of put Satan down. It's as if the energy of Satan in the poem wants to kind of take over the poem. And so as you get this amazing stuff about Satan, then Milton at the bottom says, yeah, but just remember he's not very good. It's a bit like that when you read it.
Fine.
Yeah. The reason Milton wrote in fetters when he wrote of angels and God and at liberty of devils and hell is because he was a true poet and of the devil's party without knowing it. I'll read another bit. How are we getting on? A memorable fancy. No, it's not too bad. This is Blake. Oh, I forgot to say that bit earlier where he says energy is eternal delight. That's the devil himself speaking. That's the voice of the devil. So if you think about this, to write that in Blake's time was an incredibly inflammatory thing to do. This was like just whether even the beginnings of atheism, yeah? To write that would have gone completely against the whole of the status quo. As I was walking, this is him, he's talking about a vision. As I was walking among the fires of hell, delighted with the enjoyments of genius. So he's saying that genius lives in hell. And the genius is the poetic expression which is close to the unconstrained energy. Which to angels, as I was walking among the fires of hell, delighted with the enjoyments of genius, which to angels look like torment and insanity, I collected some of their proverbs, thinking that as the sayings used in a nation mark its character, so the proverbs of hell show the nature of infernal wisdom, better than any descriptions of buildings or garments. When I came home, on the abyss of the five senses, where a flat-sided steep or hill frowns over the present world, I saw a mighty devil, folded in black clouds, hovering on the sides of the rock with corroding fires. Corroding fires is like that. That's the corrosion again of the Negredo. With corroding fires, he wrote the following sentence. So that's the Negredo is the creative act. It's like taking the unconstrained energy and it's starting to write it and make it into art. The corroding fire, he wrote the following sentence, now perceived by the minds of men and read by them on earth. How do you know? But every bird cuts the airy way. That cuts the airy way is an immense world of delight, closed by your senses five. How do you know that every bird that cuts the airy way, so it's saying, how do you know that every bird that flies, that you see flying, how do you know it isn't an immense world of delight? Closed by your senses five. So he's saying that our basic understanding is limited. If we really saw a bird, if we really saw what it was like, we would see enlightenment, we would see that unconstrained energy, we would see the energy of eternal delight, we would see the immense world of delight. And then he talks about the proverbs of hell. I'll just read a few of these. Drive your cart and plough over the bones of the dead. He's no respecter of tradition. Eternity is in love with the productions of time. So what you get in the Bible is you get a book of Proverbs, don't you? But they've come from God and the prophets that are inspired by God. These are ones that are inspired by the enlightened consciousness that is expressing it through the poetic genius. Yeah? Prisons are built with stones of law, brothels with bricks of religion. The pride of the peacock is the glory of God. The pride of the peacock is the glory of God. The lust of the goat is the bounty of God. The wrath of the lion is the wisdom of God. The nakedness of woman is the work of God. The pride of the peacock is the glory of God. The lust of the goat is the bounty of God. The wrath of the lion is the wisdom of God. The nakedness of woman is the work of God. The roaring of lions, the howling of wolves, the raging of the stormy sea, and the destructive sword are portions of eternity, too great for the eye of man. So the raging of the stormy sea, the roaring of lions and wolves, and the destructive sword, it's like the devil or the demon, are portions of eternity. So for eternity, Blake means the truth. He means that pure energy of enlightenment. And it goes on. Exuberance is beauty. Improvement makes straight roads. That's the path of the rational Dharma. But the crooked roads without improvement are roads of genius. Improvement makes straight roads, but the crooked roads without improvement are roads of genius. And when he says genius, he means enlightenment. He means the poetic inspiration, which was his gateway to enlightenment. A little bit more? Another memorable fancy. I was in a printing house in hell. So this is Blake the engraver. This is the alchemy again. I was in a printing house in hell and saw the method in which knowledge is transmitted from generation to generation. So I think what he's talking about here is, how is the Dharma transmitted, if you look at it in a way? How is the truth transmitted in hell? I was in a printing house in hell and saw the method in which knowledge is transmitted from generation to generation. I love this. In the first chamber was a dragon man, clearing away the rubbish from a cave's mouth. Within, a number of dragons were hollowing the cave. So they're digging, the dragons are digging in the cave, aren't they? In the second chamber was a viper, folding around the rock and the cave, and others adorning it with gold, silver, and precious stones. So adorning it with gold, silver, and precious stones is a line straight out of a Mahayana Buddhist sutra, isn't it? In the third chamber was an eagle with wings and feathers of air. He caused the inside of the cave to be infinite. Around were numbers of eagle-like men who built palaces in the immense cliffs. He caused the inside of the cave to be infinite. So that's saying that the visionaries, the eagles, are saying that this room, if we had the eagles here, the experience of it would be infinite, not of being bound into a room. In the fourth chamber, I love this, in the fourth chamber were lions of flaming fire raging around and melting the metals into living fluids. In the fourth chamber were lions of flaming fire raging around and melting the metal into living fluids. So that's alchemy again, isn't it? That's the heating, the dissolving. There they were received by men who occupied the sixth chamber and took the forms of books and were arranged in libraries. So he's saying this is how we create art, it's how we create books. He has another vision. An angel takes him. They go off to the edge of this world. He looks out. They sit in the root of this tree overlooking this vast cliff. It's like a big panorama. It's a bit like one of those panoramas in Lord of the Rings, you know, where they're sort of inside and they're looking out over this vast, the movie anyway. So I remained with him, the angel, sitting in the twisted root of an oak. He was suspended in a fungus. So the angel was hanging in a fungus, which hung with the head downward into the deep. So this angel is hanging upside down. This is the Nagredo, this is the black sun.
Makes me think a lot of Book of Revelation in the Bible.
It is, yeah. Yeah, he's very influenced by Revelation and by Isaiah as well. I think there's a lot of it, yeah. By degrees we beheld the infinite abyss, fiery as the smoke of a burning city. Beneath us, at an immense distance, was the sun, black but shining. Round it were fiery tracks on which revolved vast spiders crawling after their prey, which flew or rather swam in the infinite deep, in the most terrific shapes of animals sprung from corruption. And the air was full of them and seemed composed of them. These are devils and are called powers of the air. I now asked my companion, the angel, what was my eternal lot? He said, between the black and white spiders. But now from between the black and white spiders a cloud and fire burst and rolled through the deep, blackening all beneath, so that the nether deep grew black as a sea and rolled with a terrible noise. Beneath us was nothing now to be seen but a black tempest, till looking east between the clouds and the waves, we saw a cataract of blood mixed with fire, and not many stones throw from us appeared and sunk again the scaly fold of a monstrous serpent. At last to the east, distant about 3 degrees, appeared a fiery crest above the waves. Slowly it reared like a ridge of golden rocks, till we discovered 2 globes of crimson fire, from which the sea fled away in clouds of smoke. And now we saw it was the head of Leviathan. His forehead was divided into streaks of green and purple, like those on a tiger's forehead. Soon we saw his mouth and red gills hang just above the raging foam, tinging the black deep with beams of blood, advancing towards us with all the fury of a spiritual existence.
It is at the level of cosmic consciousness that we call it, all that is very cosmic.
It is, yeah.
And it
Yeah.
takes, some imagination, reflecting, is very deep, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of meaning in it.
Yes. I think it's like you you'll never get you can't comprehend it. It's fathomless, isn't it? And it just keeps it in a way. It assaults your reason, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It attacks your reason, you could say, or threatens your reason. It just keeps undermining it, almost like it just kind of. So if you read Blake, he's got stuff that goes on for like hundreds of pages like that. But if you just keep reading it and trusting that it has an effect, it starts to evoke a particular thing in your consciousness.
Garavachitta's famous favourite poet, am I right?
Yes, yeah, he was really into Blake. Yeah, yeah. Any audience, I think, who would listen, and there weren't many. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He never made. He lived in poverty his whole life.
What about his artwork, which is so fine? His etchings.
Yeah, I don't think he ever got much money, did he? He was in debt a lot. Do you know much
about
about
the Manchester Art Gallery today?
Right.
There's any of the pieces of work in there, and the comments were when they produced this work, they were fiercely attacked for being immoral or this or that or the other. It was like time after time when there was a picture, most of them were poor and they had to have people who were there.
Yeah.
Especially with British artwork, was at certain stages in history, British history, if you painted black figures and you painted anything other than, no.
It can be misunderstood, because it belongs to a different level.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, most of them had to have a patron that would support them to write.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't.
Yeah.
And my daughter loved it when she was doing her O-levels. She was fascinated by Milton.
Yeah. Yeah.
Milton's Paradise Lost.
Yeah. It's an amazing
So
poem.
much for me, I must admit.
Yeah. So I'll just finish off and then maybe we'll have a cup of tea. But I think we're moving into the discussion mode, aren't we? Which is good. Just it gets quite humorous at points as well. Just near the end. Note, he's talking about the angel who showed him around. This angel, who is now become a devil, is my particular friend. We often read the Bible together in its infernal or diabolical sense, which the world shall have if they behave well. So he's actually saying you can read the Bible you can read the visionary text with the energy. You don't have to read it as interpreted by the Christians in a way, isn't he? I also have the Bible of hell, which, excuse me, struck down. The Bible of hell, which the world shall have whether they are not. And it ends with a chorus, and I'll just read this. And the last line, I think, is Blake. It's totally blatant. There is amazing, it's a Blake on the imagination. It's not this, it's somewhere else, and it says, he said something like, when I see a sun in the sky, he says, I don't see a beautiful golden disc burning above a skyline over a sea. He says, I see 100,000 angels riding across in chariots crying, holy, holy, holy. Yeah. This is in, let the priests of the raven of dawn No longer in deadly black, with hoarse note, curse the sons of joy. Nor his accepted brethren, who tyrant he calls free, lay the bound or build the roof. Nor pale religious lechery call that virginity that wishes but acts not. This final line of the poem. For everything that lives is holy.
That's lovely. What have we thought?
Yeah, for everything that lives is holy.
Nobody thought that.
He was well ahead of his time.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thanks for your patience. Did go on, I always do, I'm sorry.